Perfect. Thanks, Gabe. So hi, everyone. I'm Gretchen Anderson, the Sustainability Program Coordinator at Greater Portland Council of Governments, or GPCOG for short. Thank you all for joining us for session 3 of the Municipal Grid Resilience series. We're really glad to see such a strong interest, specifically municipal, on this topic. Grid reliability and resilience are like central to so many of the conversations we are having with communities. So whether it be around electrification, emergency preparedness, economic development, it's vast. So it's great to see the interest there. Next slide, Gabe. So just to walk through today's agenda. So we'll just give a brief overview and objectives of what we at GPCOG are hoping to achieve from this webinar series. Then Craig Nale is going to be giving an overview of CMP's integrated grid plan, as well as a couple of other topics. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion. So again, have those questions ready. Feel free to put them in the chat if you're more comfortable to do so, or you can come off mute when the time is allocated. So what is GPCOG? So for anyone who may not know or is newer to our work, we're a regional planning organization, and we serve municipalities across Cumberland County. We support communities through like a range of issues. So sustainability obviously being one, transportation, land use, economic development, and broadband. A big part of our role is helping municipalities like navigate these complex systems and connect like maybe the federal and state and regional processes to like the municipal priorities that they may have, and like connecting those dots. And this series is one example of that work. So we're hearing from communities that they want to better understand what's happening with the grid and how they can have a voice in decisions that directly affect them and their constituents. Next slide. And then so this series is connected to the broader Southern and Mid-Coast Resilience Coordinator Collaborative, which brings together regional planning organizations and associated staff across York, Cumberland, Saginaw, Lincoln, Knox, and surrounding counties. The goal is simple for us as a collaborative, is to make sure that we are thinking regionally and that our communities have the information, tools, and relationships that they need to plan ahead. Next slide, Gabe. So the purpose of this series, so it was to help municipalities better understand increasing electric demand, decarbonization goals, and the realities of maintaining and modernizing grid infrastructure, clarifying how local governments can engage in the planning and regulatory process, and strengthen grid resilience across the region. So in session 1 and 2, we heard from Acadia Center and the Maine PUC about integrated grid planning on a macro scale and how that regulatory process is working. And then we also heard from Karina from SMPDC on the Southern Maine Energy Resilience Plan and the local resilience strategies and the data connecting all of those things. So with those 2 sessions like under our belt, the common theme that emerged was interest in hearing directly from CMP and how they're planning for reliability, resilience, and future demand. So that's what this webinar is about. But before we get started, I want to punt it over to Karina for an upcoming webinar workshop.
Thanks, Gretchen. Yes, even before we get started in this webinar, if you're excited about more learning opportunities related to this topic, as part of the Southern Maine Energy Resilience Planning effort, we're going to be hosting a webinar in March specifically about microgrids and backup power. So taking this concept all the way down to the facility level of, what backup power solutions do you currently have for your facility and what could you have in the future? And specifically, what is a microgrid and what purpose do they serve? So If you're interested in joining on that, it will be Monday, March 2nd, from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. And I think the link is in the chat, or scan the QR code, and we'll have some technical experts there to help us with those discussions and answer all your questions you have about microgrids. So thanks so much for letting us chime in, and looking forward to hearing from Craig at CMP.
Thanks, Karina. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig to walk us through the integrated grid plan. And then after his presentation, we'll open up for questions and discussion. So again, thanks for being here.
All right, bear with me while I get this set up appropriately here. How did I do? Got it? Okay. We failed a couple times earlier, so glad to see that. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for having me. And I didn't realize quite the connection between your earlier presentations and wanting to hear directly from CMP. So I'm really happy to see that. And I know that I've connected with a bunch of you, some familiar names on here before. So good to see you all, and thanks everyone for having me. I I I always say the thing that I really enjoy most about working at CMP is that we're responsible for actually building things, and you know, that responsibility is pretty great. There's financial penalties, there's, you know, disruption to my own life and my family's lives, and you know, every time the power goes out. So it's very important work, and I think it's very complicated, and it's an exciting time to work in the field just because so much is changing. So um, my background is I worked for the legislature for quite a few years, doing policy work and legal work. And then I worked at a renewable energy company called EDP Renewables for several years. And then I've been at CMP for a couple of years now. And so what we're going to talk about today is a few things that we've been working on lately. And one of them is the integrated grid plan. You may be aware that this is a years-long initiative. We filed our integrated grid plan with the Public Utilities Commission back in December. We've also got some Portland area projects that are in the pipeline. So we'll touch on those. And part of both of these are looking at the load forecasts that we're seeing on the system for the next 10 years. How, when you apply those load forecasts to the current system, where do we see those stresses emerge? And then talking about some of the ways that we can meet or we can provide solutions for those stresses that we see on the system. I was also asked to talk about rate design and flexible interconnection, so they're a little bit different topics, but we'll touch on those as well. And please feel free to interrupt. Just I'm totally fine with that. So don't feel like you need to hold your questions at all. I always think it's helpful just to start with an overview of what CMP is. About 675,000 customers, and those are accounts, not individual people. So the people are more. We've got about 25,000 miles of line. It's enough to wrap around the entire Earth. We do have some undergrounded, both transmission and distribution. So that's a common question. We've got a little bit of that. It's expensive. You know, it's difficult to maintain. So that's why that number is lower. Outages, we keep track of outages, and about 60% of outages are caused by contact with vegetation. It's like squirrels are actually up there also. You know, scheduled maintenance is up there. Just equipment failure is up there also. But by far, it's vegetation contact that is the main cause of outages. And then I think it's always good to talk about sort of the condition that the system is in. You know, these materials are generally the cheaper ones to do distribution lines that are bare wire. So with a focus on like just a balance of what we're willing to invest in and what customers are willing to pay for, you know, we end up with some combination of bare wire, and we've got some older poles, but the company's been doing a lot of work in recent years, especially to replace, you know, when we're doing a replacement project to replace bare wire with covered wire, which allows a tree limb or something to fall on it and to you know, to clear itself without causing an outage. So those types of investments are pretty important. And then I always think this one's interesting too. The DER resources connected just on the CMP system are about 1,000 megawatts. And to put that into perspective, the peak load for the system, for the CMP system alone, is about 1,700 megawatts. That's like at the the time in the summer when everyone's got their air conditioner cranking and doing laundry and cooking dinner. So it's quite a bit of DER resources that we put on the system. It serves over half of our load. This is just a background on the integrated grid planning process. So this originated with legislation. We had a whole PUC docket that lasted from basically September of 2022 all the way through July 12th of 2024 that was dedicated to establishing what the priorities for the utilities to have in mind when they went through their grid planning process, and what was expected, what the Public Utilities Commission expected the utilities to put into their final plans. So that order was issued in July of 2024. That kicked off a formal 18-month grid planning process that both CMP and Versant just completed. So we filed our plan on December 15th. We're currently in the comment period on that plan, and we presented the plan to the commission a couple weeks ago. So you can see that recording on the commission's website. Versant will be doing theirs, I think, next week. And then this is an iterative process. So every 5 years, the utilities will be redoing these plans. So we're looking forward to kind of the next few months spending it with stakeholders in the commission and hearing about what went well in the grid planning process and what could be improved. How can we make this more valuable the next time we start it in just a year and a half? So the order that the commission issued in July of 2024, sorry, that's a typo. It should be 2024. They asked the utilities to focus on sort of three main priorities, and one is reliability and resilience. Two is improving data quality and integrity, and three is promoting flexible management of customers' resources. So that's really the perspective that we took when we went about doing the actual grid planning process. The commission also asked us to orient the process around these three milestones. So the first one was basically to achieve consensus on what the utilities were putting into the models. When we look out over that 10-year planning period, what should we be considering what assumptions should we make about what's going to happen during that period? So we'll get to this in the next slide or the next couple slides, but the forecast is really the main one. And that forecast includes both, growth in using electricity. So people installing heat pumps, just people moving to Maine and there being greater population, people buying EVs, just the general shift to electrified technologies that we've seen. But it also includes the growth in generation resources when those resources are available to dispatch, like solar is available during the day and not at night, obviously. And then projects and contingencies, so like NECEC coming online, for example, or scheduled upgrades to equipment that are already before the commission or having received some kind of approval. Milestone 2 was where we apply that forecast to the system, and we look at, again, sort of where are the constraints that we see emerging over that 10-year period. So if we're going to focus on providing safe and reliable service so that every time you hit the switch, the light comes on, what should we sort of have in our minds that are going to be the areas that are going to require us to make some improvements? And then milestone 3 is where we look at what improvements are the right ones to make to meet those needs. So if we have a very near term, very severe need, those improvements are probably going to be more on the end of like a substation upgrade or adding another circuit tie or adding new transmission. If they're sort of further out in the future at the end of that 10-year planning horizon and are just a minimal need, like 1% overload of a particular piece of equipment, then we can be looking at things like implement like rate design. We'll get to, can we get people to shift their usage enough so that we actually eliminate the need for that that proposed upgrade, or potentially defer it. Maybe we can push it out a couple of years, 10 years before the need grows enough to require an investment. So that's kind of the overall structure of the grid plan. So this is not moving on from the grid plan or the Portland area projects, but kind of diving in a little bit deeper. So if you've got questions, again, feel free to raise them, but we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about each of these. Um, okay, this is load forecast. There's a lot on this slide, but if you just start on the left side, we were directed by the commission to use the 2024 CELT forecast. And I'm probably going to forget just because I'm under pressure, but it stands for I absolutely forgetting what the CELT stands for, but it's basically generation, load growth, contingencies, all the things I mentioned on the last slide. Like how do we expect the overall use of the system from a variety of different perspectives to change over that 10-year period? And that's a forecast that the regional authority that oversees sort of the stability and capacity of the grid, they put that out every year. We've already seen the 2025 forecast come out. The 2026 forecast will come out relatively soon. So it's updated each year. For example, we saw a lot of the federal EV tax credits go away this past year. So the CELT forecast has been revised downward because we don't expect as many EVs to be on the system. So that's a regional forecast. What we do here for just our everyday planning purposes is we take that and we disaggregate it to first Maine. So we get the Maine share, and I think it's about 80. No, I don't remember what the Maine share is, but the CMP share of the Maine share is about 86%. So we've got about 86% of the load in Maine, just in the CMP territory. And then what we did from there, and this is moving into the center column. Oh, sorry, let me hit on the 50/50 and 90/10. The 50/50 and 90/10 are these are weather scenarios, and 50/50 is basically like a moderate weather scenario, and 90/10 is more of a severe weather scenario. And what the commission and we use these for are really proxies for how much stress is going to be on the system. So we can use the 90/10 to that stands in for an assumption of basically higher load growth, more EVs, more heat pumps, more people, more stress on the system. So we looked at both the 50/50 scenario and the 90/10 scenario so that we can see, under an aggressive forecast, is what we're doing going to be enough, or should we just focus on kind of the more conservative baseline forecast and use that as kind of a baseline for things that we know are going to be necessary, at least in the short term. What we did from there, and this is moving on to the center column, is we looked at each of our substations, and we've got about 480 substations at CMP spread throughout the territory. And we looked at, and this is actually down the chart in the lower right, which is impossible to read, but it's got the blue line that grows a little bit faster than the gray and the orange. We looked at the areas like the blue line is showing, that's a Portland substation, and that's showing growth that is not happening at the same rate as it is for the gray line and the orange line, and those are more rural substations. So we're not just applying that load growth evenly across the whole system. We're actually looking, at which areas are going to see a different rate of growth over that time period. We also looked at 6 different snapshots, and these are just representations of sort of the different conditions on the grid at different times of day and at different times of year. So let me just think of like a very low stress snapshot would be like a 5 o'clock on an April afternoon. You probably don't, or a May afternoon, like you might not have your heat pump running at all, whether it's heating or air conditioning. It's light out. You're probably not even using, the lights in your house really that much. People are, businesses kind of are offline. It's after work hours. So it's a very low usage of the system. You might have a little bit of solar generating, but not a ton. And then compare that with like a midsummer day, a late July afternoon where the sun is out, all the solar is cranking. everybody's got their heat pump, air conditioning their house. So those are the six snapshots are just meant to reflect six different scenarios of how we see the grid being used. And then I think this is interesting too, actually, the winter and the summer chart over on the right. We've been a summer peaking system for quite a while, and it's because people plug in air conditioners in the summer mainly. But what we're seeing is the system transition to a winter peak, and that's because of heat pumps. People are switching from oil and gas and propane to heat pumps. So we're seeing a very steady load throughout the winter, and it's an increasing load too. So more and more, instead of planning for that summer peak where we've got air conditioners running, we're planning for a very consistent and fairly long winter peak, and that's changing a bit how we approach the planning of the system. I think I've already covered this. Actually, this is just this is that forecast kind of spelled out in actual megawatts per year, and you can see this is just a comparison of the 2024 and 2025 forecast. They're actually pretty similar, but it shows the growth that we're expecting to see over this 10-year planning horizon. And actually, if you look back even further, this is pretty atypical to even see any growth at all. I'm sure we are all old enough to remember the push toward efficiency, more energy efficient appliances and those types of things. LED light bulbs have made a huge impact in actually bringing this curve into it's been negative for some time. But now that we're adopting all these electrified technologies, we're seeing that curve go back up again. So when we're looking at the system, how do we think about where these stresses, what are the stresses that are happening? And these are really the two primary ones. They're thermal overloads and voltage violations. So, think about like you're driving down the street and you're passing the distribution system. You've got the poles, you've got the wires. They're all leading into a substation somewhere, and there's pieces of equipment in that substation, like a transformer, or like a dynamic reactive device, like a StatCon, that are basically keeping the power quality high. So we're getting consistent flow of electricity across the wires to your home. That's why your lights are steady and not flickering. Um, and we've got also that same equipment is bringing power from the bulk electric system, the transmission system, down through levels of voltage to make it, something that when you plug your toaster in, it doesn't explode. So it's kind of working in both directions. And what we're really measuring here is the ability of that equipment to handle the amount of power that is flowing over it and sort of the intermittency of the power that's flowing over it. So the thermal overloads, if we've got too much flowing over the system, it's going to cause the power line or the transformer to exceed its rated capacity, and it's going to overheat, and that's going to cause damage to the equipment. So this is just due to, your common high electric usage, but it's also can be attributed to backfeeding from, solar or batteries that are sending power back into the grid. Sometimes the grid traditionally was not designed for that type of power flow, so that can exceed the rating of some of this equipment. And then older infrastructure, of course, often wasn't rated for the way that we're using it today, or it's degrading in a way that is causing it to experience a thermal overload. Voltage violations are again like the quality of the power. This can happen, like a solar array can produce power that is sort of an inconsistent voltage. And so we need things like capacitors or regulators that can sort of moderate that voltage into something that's more similar to a turbine, like a natural gas fired or oil fired or hydro, normally spins a turbine, and that produces a very consistent level of power, which solar doesn't have that ability. So this is sort of where voltage violations come into play. These can also damage equipment and impair the stability of the grid. So um, again, these happen because of the solar that's interconnected to the system, and then when we have a very long span without some of these voltage control devices on them, we also see the voltage drop or increase. And the way we went about the analysis for the grid plan, at least, and this is a higher level than what we would do for a actual investment, just because we did the whole system at once, which we normally wouldn't do. We can kind of there's areas where we know we don't need to study because it's fine, and there's areas that we know we need to study because we're experiencing a lot of violations all the time. But when we undertook the full system analysis, we we looked at the transformer level, so 250 substation transformers across those 12 different forecast scenarios, so 50-50, 90-10, and the 6 snapshots. And these kind of gave us the idea of like, okay, if we're experiencing a overload or a violation, a thermal or voltage violation at this sort of big piece of equipment that a lot of people rely on for their power, and this is like up here at the top of this diagram, feeding into the rest of the system. If we're experiencing a violation at that level of the system, it's probably a pretty severe violation. It's probably something that we need to focus on. And then we took that down a couple steps further, though, and the next level was the circuit level analysis. So if you think of like the distribution lines on the side of the road, they're leading into a feeder. And so we looked at the end of each of those circuits, sort of where those circuits originate, and then go out to your house and to your businesses. We looked at all 480 distribution circuits at the head end for thermal overload. So we took it down another step, a little more granular, to give us the next sense of like, okay, if there's violations occurring at this level, they're also, fairly severe, but we probably have more options for dealing with them. And then finally, we looked at the sub-circuit level, and for this, we just took 70 sample circuits. So of the from the 250 substation transformers and the 480 distribution circuits, we sort of classified them into very severe and very not severe or not a concern at all. And we took a sampling from all of those different categories because we wanted to see like even if it's a problem that's not bubbling up to even one of those 480 distribution circuits, is there something going on the actual distribution line that we should know about and should be including in this analysis? And then we looked at the other end of the spectrum, the things that are causing a problem at the transformer level. And we wanted to know, okay, what exactly is the cause of this? Or what typically is exactly the cause of this? What's happening on the distribution circuit that is really responsible for this? So as a result of this level of analysis, which is really, you need an electrical engineer to explain in more detail, but we established that there were about 715 needs that we see over the 10-year planning horizon. We categorized them into those into 16 different categories. And the next couple slides I really like because they give sort of a case study of what the range of these violations looks like. So Karina, here's one in Kittery and York. This is circuit 688D1. This is an area, obviously it's pretty densely populated. I assume because the value of land is fairly high and it's densely populated, there's low distributed generation in this on this circuit. So we've just got less than a megawatt forecasted on this circuit by 2034. And what's interesting here is that in the chart down below, the violations are occurring during the peaks. So those peaks are the peak in usage. And what that really shows is that the growth in this area is going to be the thing that's driving the violations. When we implement a solution, it needs to be able to handle the additional growth that we're seeing in this area. So people are installing heat pumps, they're buying EVs, they're plugging them in, and those are really the things that are causing those needs. And then if you contrast that with a circuit up in Winslow, obviously a more rural area, we've got more land available, probably cheaper. We're seeing 13 megawatts of DG forecasted by 2034. And the way that shows up in our analysis of the needs is that these violations are occurring not during the peak, not when people are using the grid, but actually when people are not using the grid. So the daytime minimum, the spring minimum, those are sort of like a mid-afternoon, not a lot of people using electricity at that time, but the solar arrays are really operating at full capacity. So it's the driver of the need is the generation that's happening, not the amount of people using the system. So I just think these are interesting because it shows the two very different scenarios that we have to plan for. And then the other one, alongside the grid plan, we also filed with Commission a climate change protection plan, which we took on in two parts. One was a vulnerability study, so we actually engaged some people at UMaine and looked at a lot of the climate science that is available, and did a whole analysis of how CMP's system is potentially vulnerable to not just weather, but like longer term climate threats. And what we found through that study was that storm events and wind, flooding, both inland and coastal, long periods of time with high heat, wood decay has actually surprised me. And wildfire, although it's a low change from current exposure, but a high potential impact if there is a wildfire. Those were the climate hazards that we found are most threatening to the system. So probably not a surprise to anybody here. Storms and flooding we've seen a lot of, especially back in 23, 24. Luckily, not so much in 25. But and then the second part of the climate change protection plan was to do a reliability assessment. So when we look at the scale of the climate threat to the system, what are the ways that we can sort of try to mitigate that threat? And these all relate to some filings in the docket on a similar topic, but they're probably fairly obvious. But a substation that's in a floodplain, if we do any upgrades to that substation, we should probably consider relocating it or building a wall around it that can withstand flooding at the level that we expect. The wood decay was interesting because it's really a result of the higher temperatures and the increased prevalence of just bugs and woodpeckers and things that like to eat wood. And that's actually significant because the cross arms that hold the wires are often made of wood. The poles themselves are made of wood. So I think we had a storm last year where there were like over 1,000 poles that were damaged just because of the snow and ice on the wires. So it's not insignificant the level of damage that can be caused just from the utility poles breaking in storm conditions. And then acid condition is another source of stress on the system. So just as we there's like I said, there's 25,000 miles of line out there. I always think it's amazing driving around. There's always a utility pole. There's always an electrical wire on the side of the road. It's just an incredible amount of stuff out there to maintain and to make sure is operating the way it should be. So it's a constant effort to both assess the condition of the assets, but also to make sure that We have a plan for replacing them and upgrading them, just so that they continue to provide the level of service that we're even seeing today. All right, methods for meeting demand and providing reliability. This is kind of a summary slide that we included in the grid plan itself, and it breaks it into near term and long term, and shows sort of how these relate back to those three priorities that the commission gave to us for reliability, data quality, and management of resources. So reliability and resilience is the near term, especially, is looking at those more severe and near term needs, that things like hardening a substation or replacing a circuit or providing a backup circuit tie to reduce outages are really pretty common and pretty necessary methods of meeting those needs. But we've also got in here a lot of the work that we've actually been doing for several years now, which is to essentially to improve the visibility and control that people in the back office have over what's happening on the system. So um, you, I hate to use this example, but you might be aware of what happened over the weekend to three of our substations in Kennebec County. Some damage was caused by an individual to those, and um, we were able to use these distribution automation or SCADA devices, these communication um, devices that we've put out on the system to basically take some of the assets offline and repair them, but at the same time be able to reroute power to customers so that there's essentially no disruption in service in doing that. And that's incredibly helpful in storm situations. We're able to basically isolate a portion of the grid where a tree might be over a wire, but provide service to everybody on both sides. And instead of having everybody on both sides out of power while we send a truck out and take the tree off the wire and replace the pole and get everything back up to normal, we're able to keep all those people on both sides, operating as though there was no outage at all. And then we can put the truck out there and sort of take our time, or take a little bit more time anyway, with doing the restoration, and have less of a disruption. So those types of things are really critical in enabling a lot of these longer term strategies, which are flexible interconnection, which we'll get to, but also building into our planning the ability to see those peaks over the year, so that instead of instead of looking at the system as though it experiences just one peak that we need to be able to serve 365 days a year, we can plan to serve that peak just during the time when the peak is happening. So that's a capability that we're looking to increasingly be able to incorporate. Let's see, battery storage here is another one that's listed. This can be helpful in the case of an asset that might be operating over its rating. We can basically funnel some of that energy into the battery to keep the asset within its operating limits, and then deploy the battery when the piece of equipment is below its operating limits. Yeah. You might see there's some acronyms on here that you might not be familiar with, but like DERMS and active network management, or ADMS, are all and I think we'll get to these too, actually, but these are all methods for basically controlling the output of a distributed generation resource, or a load resource, like a EV charging station. If the system isn't able to handle all the 12 banks of EV chargers all charging at the same time, if there just isn't enough power available, or if there isn't enough system capacity to handle the amount of power that would be necessary to operate those at the same time, instead of like taking it offline completely, or instead of building the system to be able to handle that sort of unlikely scenario, these types of technologies allow us to ramp it down to operate it within the appropriate level. So it's really helpful in getting things online faster. But also from a, from a grid operator perspective, it's really helpful to have that visibility and control so that we can know that, we're keeping the grid within its allowable limits. So this bring it to the Portland area. This is a map of the existing transmission and subtransmission lines that are in the Portland area. And this is a project that is actually in front of the commission right now that you may have heard about. And it's basically to meet the growing demand in the Portland area. I mean, this is something that CMP identified, I think back, yeah, in 2008. So it's been through a bunch of different planning iterations, but this is a need that's been growing for quite some time. And it's to meet, the growth in population, the growth in just electric use in this area. Um, so I'll show you on the next slide, I think, what the total proposal is, but you can see up in phase one, this is the only one that's in front of the commission right now. But there's some expansion of some existing substations and some new transmission line in existing right of way where there's already transmission line. So no new cutting or no no new transmission line. But this runs up from Raven Farm in Yarmouth, which if you're driving down 295 and you get to the second Yarmouth exit, the Yarmouth exit that's closer to Portland, it's right off the exit there where they built the park and ride a few years ago. And then it runs down into Falmouth inland a little bit and then down to Presumpscot Street in Portland. And you can see that the yellow line is a new um, that is the only section of new line, and that would run from basically just across East Deering, where there's already right of way next to Presumpscot Street, and then past the new Root Institute building into Bayside, and then through the Portland Peninsula. And if you're on the Portland Peninsula, you know that almost all of that is underground, so that would be the plan there too. Um, and then phase two is addressing sort of the southern component of this, and that involves work all the way down into Blue Orchard Beach up through Scarborough and into Cape Elizabeth, South Portland area. So the purpose of this is to essentially establish a secure source of bulk electricity into the sort of, I'm going to say the Portland Peninsula, but it's really larger than that. It's sort of South Portland, Westbrook, Portland Peninsula, Deering, all these areas. You may be familiar with the Forest Ave substation that CMP built a couple years ago. It's right next to there's a Bangor Savings Bank and the big post office, Deering Oaks Park. You might not know it's a substation. It's enclosed, but that's the type of the work that we've been doing in Portland and the surrounding areas for several years, just to meet the like hyper local demand. But this is sort of a much, if we look at it from a larger scale, this is about really providing a secure, consistent source of power into the whole area, so that if we do experience an outage on some part of the system that's shown on this chart, we aren't losing, tens of thousands of customers because of that outage. We increase the ability of the system to reroute power and provide another source. So this is ongoing. It's in front of the commission. That phase one part is in front of the commission. We've done a lot of outreach in the communities that has gone well. I think we may have done some outreach with GPCOG. So this very much out there. If you've got questions about it, we are happy to follow up with you. All right. So I'm going to switch gears to rate design, but if there are questions on the first part here, happy to take a little break.
Craig, that's great. I think there was just one question in the comments, just regarding, Renee is on a planning board, and just kind of discussion of, increase in accessory dwelling units and affordable housing. And for future housing developments and additional dwelling units, should we be talking to CMP to ensure that power can be reliably sent down to the Booth Bay Peninsula? If so, who would be our contact?
Um, Sorry, are those okay for additional housing on the Booth Bay Peninsula? Should we be talking to CMP to ensure that power can reliably be brought down? Um, yeah, I think so. Are any of these? Well, I guess I should say there is a whole process of reliably interconnecting new projects like housing. So that, certainly not new to be able to um, look at that from a process perspective, like what are the components there, and I can follow up with you. I'll look in the chat for your name and contact info, but um, I'll connect you with someone who can work through what that process is like. But um, what I think one of the big benefits of doing this grid plan, and I know the Booth Bay Peninsula is on the front burner of uh of actual work, not just sort of hypothetical grid planning. Um, but we're constantly every year we look at how that load forecast is being updated and how it's going to be applied across the system. So we're constantly refreshing those assumptions about um, both it- all the new load that's projected in an area and the new EVs or heat pumps or growth in electrification or DERs. So um, I guess that's all to say, like often these types of like native load are not a surprise to CMP. It's usually more like a data center trying to locate here, which is not a good example because there really isn't that happening, but um, sort of more of a large industrial customer that we couldn't possibly have foreseen. When those start to show up on the grid, that's a spot load that requires a little bit more planning and working with the commission and the customer to make sure that the costs are allocated fairly between the customer and the whole system.
Great. Craig, there's a couple more questions. So Mehdi from Yarmouth was wondering if there's any examples of planned, like, managed retreat for any infrastructure that's at risk from sea level rise, storm surge, and the like.
Yeah, great question. We have a case study in our climate change resilience plan that is I can send Gabe a link to our website, or I can't. Yeah, I'll do that to make sure everybody can access that. Um, it's on our main page under smart energy. There's a grid and climate subpage there if you're searching around for it, but it's got all the links to these reports. And I can't remember what exact substation it is, but it is what you're describing. It's a we looked at the vulnerability of that substation and we knew we needed to do repairs to it, and took a preventative action to protect it from the type of flooding that we were pretty sure is going to happen at that substation. So, um, but otherwise, it's for a lot of it, it's really trying to keep up with it. It's in storms, we don't have a lot of time to respond. It's all about getting the power back on. So we do our best to replace those. If it's a old weak pole, we put up one that meets the new planning standards that is a stronger pole. But I think that's really the benefit in trying to shift some of those reactive storm costs into preventative investments on things like just really basic things like a fiberglass crossarm instead of a wood crossarm to hold the wires up. a tree can fall on the wire and they won't break the fiberglass crossarm, but they will break the wood crossarm. So,
Great,
you know,
Greg. And
it's
being cognizant of time,
yeah,
just getting through the remainder of the agenda. I'm going to hold off on the remaining questions and see if we have time at the end.
great. Okay, rate design. So I think just in for some background on rate design, it is important to think about just CMP's role in the provision of electricity to you. So we've got generation, we've got transmission, distribution, and then it finally gets to your home or business. Um, we are unfortunately responsible for billing you for all of these things, but the only one that we really have any control over is the distribution component here. Um, the transmission component is regulated by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and that's done at a regional level. So we actually kind of benefit at the transmission from the way transmission is paid for because we have such a small load in New England. We pay about 8% of the total cost of transmission in New England. But distribution is, you know, is all Maine. It's regulated by the PUC, and that's the component that is CMP. Um, the generation component, the supply, whether you're on a community solar project or have rooftop solar, or you just take the standard offer, those are all just costs that appear on your bill, but we just pass them straight through back to the supplier. And then public policy or stranded costs is the other component. These are like the net energy billing payments, the low income assistance programs, energy efficiency programs to Efficiency Maine. These again have no impact on CMP. So there is an open docket at the commission right now studying the potential for a time of use rate for supply. We currently just have a time of use rate for the delivery portion of your bill, which is something like 45% of your bill. Um, so that's like, you know, if we can include supply and public policy or supply anyway, that would, you know, that would be another 40% or so of your bill, and that would be a stronger price signal. But um, really, when we talk about rate design, it's sort of there's a cost to the supply and to the delivery of power. And what we're talking about is how do we allocate those costs among the people and the types of businesses, the DER projects, the person who just owns a single family home, the person who owns a home with rooftop solar, the um, all the different types of people who use the system. How do we allocate the costs of running it fairly? Um, and I think also it's important here to remember that CMP has a revenue decoupling mechanism. So we don't we just there's a cost of the system, and that's what the PUC approves for recovery of investment in the system. And if people use more energy, we don't CMP doesn't make any more money. We don't lose money if people don't use any energy. So it sort of takes the weather out of the picture. Um, so with all that as background, we've got currently three alternative rates in addition to just the standard rate. Um, you have a sort of fixed cost on your bill, which is just it sort of doesn't matter how much electricity you use. You have the privilege, you know, you have the ability to use it whenever you want. There's a cost to that just to maintain the system. And then there's a volumetric portion of your bill also that if you use more power, you pay more because your use of the system is higher. So the standard rate A is just fixed cost and fixed per kilowatt hour price. ATOU is the residential time of use rate. So if you use power between 5 and 9, you are electing to pay more for power during that time, but to compensate you for that inconvenience, you get power cheaper the rest of the time. ALM is a pretty targeted rate. Very few people are eligible for it. You have to have a separate meter. And then electric technology just increases the fixed portion of your bill. So you pay a higher amount for sure every month, but your per kilowatt hour charge is lower. And so people who use a lot of electricity, you might have heat pumps, EV, 5 kids, that might be a rate that works for you. And let's see, we've done rate design stakeholder meetings for years now. There's a proceeding at the commission. Um, this is a surprisingly contentious topic. It's hard to fairly allocate these costs. So Um, it's some of the discussion that's happening right now is like, how much should we encourage people or not say anything to them at all or force them into a something like a time of use rate because we want to sort of prevent people from using electricity at those peak hours. But what if people can't afford to do that? What if you have a job that's not flexible like that? What if you just have some circumstances that would end up costing you a lot more money than is actually fair to you? So those are the types of concerns that kind of go into a rate design discussion usually. I know we're running out of time and we've got flexible interconnection too, but you want me to hit it quickly?
Yeah, if you can, Craig. And then we just have
Yeah.
one more question, I think, in the chat currently, and then
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so flexible interconnection. This is one of those. We actually won a grant with the Department of Energy Resources, formerly the Governor's Energy Office last year. We got a grant from the US DOE to implement a pilot here, which is um, again, it's looking at the capacity of the system, so that black line, the hosting capacity line, and then you can see the DER output exceeds that black line in a few places. And without flexible interconnection, we would either need to fully take the DER offline, or we would need to build the system so that it met that peak of the blue line. And with flexible interconnection, what we're able to say is like, instead of either taking it offline or building to that peak, we're just going to curtail the power that is output from that DER during that small period of time. So typically, what, 90% of the time operating as if, totally normal. But for a very short period of time, we're going to curtail you and bring you back into compliance.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig. This has been great. So the question that we held from the previous conversation was, and you kind of alluded to it, but how do you fit data centers into this plan and how is CMP planning for them? So I know you mentioned that, potentially there's not any currently, but there have been,
Mhm.
conversations of them happening. They've popped up at planning boards, at least conversations of them. So I think it is a real, topic of conversation.
Yeah. So I know that a lot of data centers now are looking, they are aware that people are concerned about the cost to the system associated with them. And a lot of them are being proposed with their own source of power now. So it sort of takes care of that supply component. But any interconnecting customer, whether you're, a data center or a wind farm, you are generally responsible for providing the necessary system upgrades to accommodate what you are using or putting onto the system. So um, NECEC is a great example, just by building that line, which is, providing power into Maine. The project was responsible for a number of upgrades at Maine Yankee, in Buxton, like places that are not even connected physically to the line itself, to account for the instability, the insecurity that new 1,200 megawatts of hydro from Canada was gonna cause on the electric system. So that is a principle that holds true across the board. When somebody causes a new stress, we allocate the cost to the person to the thing that is causing the new stress.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig. So we couldn't get to all questions today. I think there's a couple more, but we can definitely send them to Craig to be answered for our resource sheet. And we'll definitely connect anyone that has requested additional information. Um, so thank you all. We really appreciate it. And thanks, Craig, for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.